So I noticed that yourself and Faiza as well, when you talk about African art, you talk about it separately to Libyan art. And that is really interesting because as a North African myself, I do feel like I have both identities, you know, like the whole, obviously I don't identify as Black, I identify as North African, but the whole kind of Black Lives Matter movement at the moment resonates with me to some extent. And also when I look at African art or post-colonial art, for example, Faiza's artwork, which is about Black identity and African identity, that does resonate with me. So I wanted to ask you, like, if you, yourself and Faiza, do you see a distinction between your Libyan, like your Arab identity and your African identity, or do you think it's the same thing?
For sure, 100%. I mean, I got my master's in international studies specifically on African art. And I studied the different, my thesis was all about the differences between West African art and North African art. Mm-hmm. And the similarities, of course, because you do have, you know, the art used as protection in between the two. But I think, and I'll let Faiza, of course, follow up with this, but I think also for Libyans and a lot of maybe other Arabs in the region, we don't really have a lot of conversations about art. We don't have like our art history. We don't really know who the artists were that were great before us, but yet we can name off Picasso, Moreau, you know, all Kandinsky, all these amazing artists. And then you ask people to name 5, you know, artists that they knew in history, art history, and some of them, you know, would be very hard pressed. We don't value museums. We don't value even going to the mosques and seeing the beautiful calligraphy. We don't make it a family event. We don't say, let's all go. Let's, you know, the museums here have family days. So I think by that, it's free family days at that, you know, where you can take the family of 6 into a museum for free, which is amazing considering the cost behind that for, you know, somebody in an Arab country. But I think that's really what's missing, having this, the art history and having who was here before us and what they've done. And with African art, you have it. You can go to all the different countries because most of them were looted, and people came out and they said, this is a mask and it was used for this exactly, and this is how they used it in this ceremony, and they wrote all that down. So you have this sense of that history in African art, of course not in contemporary African art, but you have that sense of history that part of that art was ingrained and has been part of conversations. But North African art has not been part of conversations. And I think that makes it a little harder to not harder, but to really kind of make sure that there is that distinction, because we are missing that history.
So it's not, so in your opinion, it's not the artwork per se that's the difference, but it's the level of discussion and engagement around it. Well, obviously you do identify differences between West African and North African.
Oh yeah, there's, I mean, the artwork for sure is different. I mean, artists in Libya would definitely have different things that they need to get out than an artist in Nigeria. So the conversation would definitely be different. But I think, yeah, it's a hard question. I need like 4 more hours.
Yeah, share that, please.
And this touches on what we talked about last Friday in our conversation about politicized identities. You know, like at least in the context of Libya, it was part of the national strategy to mobilize an Arab identity and just strengthen that Arab identity, and then that was switched into strengthening an African identity, and that's why Gaddafi became like the king of Africa and I don't know what. So I remember when I left and I was 16 years old on my own to Canada, and I remember I had a girl from Zimbabwe said, "Hey Shada, come, we're gonna have an African meeting," and I said, "Okay, why are you telling me?" Because at that time, I'm like, I never thought of myself as African. I'm a Ziriya, so like I'm Arab, supposedly. And so she said, come to the African meeting. And I said, okay, I'm not African. She's like, aren't you Libyan? And I said, yeah. And so like, therefore, and it was then that I realized my identity has politicized way too much, because we want to, and that's colonialism as well, the legacy of it, that I did not want to identify as African, even though I was African and I am African. But there is, and even when saying African, I have to emphasize, I'm not only African, I'm North African. Like, there is, and I definitely do recognize the difference of cultures. But even the culture of South Africa and Swaziland are extremely different. But they don't mind saying we're Africans, the Swazis and the South Africans. But like in North Africa, there's more complex political identities that must be explored further in order to answer why is it that we make a distinction between Libyan identity and African identity. And I think probably, at least in the Libyan context, the movement, and that's what Khulud kind of was talking about, the need to explore the history. There's been a lot of movement of civilizations and identities that have lived throughout North Africa. And for me, I always tell my parents, I'm like, my last name is Beta, like that's not Arabic and that's not a Maziri. What is that? Like, and my mom's last name is Turki, and I'm like, that's Turkish. Who am I? Like, where am I from? And so there's a lot of movement to kind of examine.
Maybe from Egypt.
Maybe, I gotta do my ancestry test to find out. But it's just like this movement makes it a little more complicated, beautiful, fluid and beautiful, but yet complex, that must be examined a little more and explored a little more. That's what I think. I'm not an artist, so I can't speak on behalf of art.
Hayes, I think you wanted to say something. I think that her mic was coming on and off. Maybe she has.
She's also saying that there's electricity cuts and issues with.
Fine. Okay. Maybe when she fixes her mic or types up. So yeah, I get what you're saying, Sherda, and it's a difficult one. Me and Sean were discussing this the other day because basically there's this Algerian lady called Malia Bouatia, and she was the first head of the National Union of Students that was black, that identified as black, but she was Amazighi and white and North African. And I found it a bit problematic because I didn't like the fact that she decided to kind of identify as black, even though we have, as North Africans, as fairer skinned North Africans, for lack of a better expression, we have some privileges that other Africans don't have. And I don't think it's fair for her to kind of wear this jumper and take it on and off as it suits her. I identify as black to become the first person to do X, Y, or Z, but then you're not facing the injustices that black Africans face on a daily basis. For example, like, in Morocco, West African migrants at the moment struggle with, they don't get the same salary in the workplace. They may struggle to marry Amazigh or Arab partners because of family, prejudices and whatever. So we have privilege. That's why I find this conversation very difficult, because yes, I do recognize that as North Africans, we do have a partial Black African ancestry. I'm sure like all of us have some West African blood in us, but at the same time, we're part of this complex dynamic where historically Arabs and Amazigh in North Africa have also oppressed black people. So it's a tricky one, isn't it?
I agree with you. Morocco, I think, because we went to Morocco last year I took a group of Americans actually on a museum and culinary tour. We were supposed to go again in March, and it was of course canceled. Walking around with Americans and trying to show them that this, Arab country had so many different religions. One of the days we had a tour in a synagogue, and then we were in Tangier, and we'd gone to one of the Catholic churches, and then the call to prayer came out, and people were just standing there just amazed. They're like that's all three, and so, but in Morocco too, it was what I thought was really amazing, especially in Rabat, it blew me away, was the number of murals and that whole part of bringing the art to the people.
Yeah.
They are everywhere. And you can do walking tours. They're across from the souk. They're up in the modern areas of town. I mean, there are buildings that I'm just shocked they haven't covered yet, but just lists and lists and lists of them. And I think, I mean, yes, for all the problems that the monarchy has, I don't want to get in trouble. We've already gotten in trouble with Egypt.
Yeah.
You know, the thoughts of having that a monarchy. One thing I will say in Morocco that I was really impressed with was the amount of art that was brought to the streets.
No, I agree with what you're saying. In Morocco, we have very different forms of artistic expression. So a lot of our music is very diverse. We have Gnawa music. Gnawa or Gnawi is, you know it, Angie, right?
Yeah.
Right. So that literally means black or of black heritage. I think in like Amazigh dialect. Correct me if I'm wrong about this, but so we have Black African music, and then we have North African, like Arab music, Rai music, which is about political injustice, like by Cheb Khaled and Cheb Mami, and other Algerian singers have influenced us on that. And same with
even
the art.
outside, like gallery owners, you know, Suria, there's this gallery French guy that went in and opened a gallery, and he opened a whole other world into the French galleries. In Marrakesh, it was, you know, the famous painter. So having that connection to the outside world and bringing artists in and bringing artists out really brings, I mean, African, you know, North African, all these other places. It was such an amazing country. Yeah.
I agree. It's an overlap. It's like Yves Saint Laurent had his, you know, he set up Jardin Majorelle there. There's a history. He's Algerian as well. He was raised there. There is a huge artistic tradition, definitely. There's two things in the chat. Emma wanted to make a point, and I think Lawrence had a question for Sama about her African identity. So I don't know which one of you wants to go first. Maybe Lawrence first, and then Emma. Hello.
Hi. Hello. Hi. Yes. Well, actually, originally the question came from Osama. It was about, but I think in a sense it's been covered already. But it'd be interesting to get Sama's perspective on the dichotomy between people with conjoint Arab and African identities. So it could be both Maghreb or it could be in the Sudanese context. And secondly, I asked Sama, in the chat room, she's given interesting answers, but maybe she could make it public, which is about the role of art in the Sudanese revolution or uprising recently. What role did it play? That'd be really, I think, interesting to hear. Is Sama, are you there?
Yes. So the thing about the Arab African identity in Sudan is very, very sensitive issue because of the of politics, actually, because the previous government, the dictatorship in Sudan, which continued for nearly 30 years and tortured people, they were like more going to extremist Islamic Arabic direction. So this made people, they are really like many people in Sudan, unwilling to be defined as Arab, actually. And now in Sudan, there is a big movement calling for taking Sudan out of the Arab League. And also there is another issues like Darfur issues, which are and there is some racism from the northern people of Sudan against the southern and western and Darfurian people, and this was supported by the government. So it's not a lot of people now in Sudan, they like the idea of being Arab, actually, and this is a very sad thing. But at the same time, like it's like we can see now many of Arab countries they are supporting the the military side of the current government, and they were supporting Omar al-Bashir, the previous government. So people in Sudan, they're not very happy with the Arab countries. So it's a very sensitive issue. And most of the people, they just identify that we speak Arabic, but it's just we are Arab because we speak Arabic, and this language was kind of forced because we speak many other languages. Like, for example, I'm from a Nubian background, but I don't speak Nubian language because the government forced people to speak Arabic. So it's a very sensitive thing there. I'm from Nubian background, but also I have Arab blood as well. So my great grandfather, he came down from the Nubia, Sudan, in North Sudan, to where we live now in northern Khartoum. So I'm mixed. I have a mix. But really, I feel like Arab is culture. I don't see myself as Arab actually, but I see myself in the Arabic culture. I see myself African actually. I don't see myself as Arab, but it is my culture. I love Arabic. I love the classic Arabic poems. My mother is the Arabic language teacher.
Interesting.
Yeah, so as I was saying before, like sometimes I don't feel comfortable like identifying as African because I kind of feel like I don't have a right to, if that makes sense. Because like I sort of associate it with like a struggle, and a lot of African countries had to face slavery, and obviously Arab countries didn't like as much. I think they did a bit, but I'm not really sure about the history of that. But yeah, so I don't always feel comfortable, and I don't know, maybe I don't realize, but maybe it's also sort of like a privilege thing. Because I remember like the one time I told someone I was African, like in secondary school, they're like, oh, what tribe do you come from? So I think maybe if people put themselves out as African more, they'd get more sort of hate. Maybe it's a privilege thing as well, but I don't know. I don't really necessarily think of that, but I don't know.
Interesting. Sherda, do you have any opinion on this?
Yeah, I definitely see parallels to that type of identification, playing the card, like for example, choosing what card I could play and what that could get me. So for example, and my brother, right? My brother came to the US in 2014. I came before him, but he came. I mean, 2014 hasn't been like it's recent. So when he was writing his personal statements for colleges this year, he was saying like, oh, as a Libyan American, or like talked about like, so you use the identity of being Libyan and then living in America, the identity of being a migrant into the US. So like these identities to create a story. It is a true story. It is his story, but there's definitely a card that like we can use to get certain things. Like if it's for me, for example, if it's important that I play I could choose. I could play my Libyan card, or I can just pass by and not use my Libyan card. And that's I think what Amal is saying. For example, if I want to identify with the African community, I could choose to say, well, I'm African, I'm from Libya. Or I could say, well, I'm Arab, I'm from Libya. Or I could say I'm Caucasian because I'm North African. So like there's so many cards that, and that's what privilege is the ability to pick and choose what card that can benefit you most in different situations. Right. And that's why I think that's what Amal is trying to say, is that the feeling uncomfortable to identify with a particular group of people, even though it is true that you can, but just that card of saying identify with that group just because it benefits me in that context.
Yeah, and it reminds me when I was in the UK, at the university, I would attend all the events by the different societies, be it the African society, be it the Arab society, be it whatever.
Yeah. No, you're so right, Shadow. You know, this is the problem I have with political blackness, people that identify as black politically, because black people cannot choose to no longer be like, they can't turn off the switch to not be black tomorrow and not face oppression or not face a racist remark or being looked at weirdly, having their name scrutinized on a CV. Whereas a North African, a white North African that might want to play off the black card can choose to do that and tomorrow can opt out of that and not face the problems that black people face.